Thanks. Actually, I'm going to say that again. Welcome everyone to our first webinar of 2025. Now that we have recording started. Thank you all so much for being here, for taking the time out of your day to learn a bit about what we're expecting in the next legislative session and how you can be involved. And also, I'm going to do a little bit of the process of the legislature because I know that can be confusing. And it's different everywhere. So, just give you, there we go. I do have a brief agenda for us this afternoon. I'm just going to give you a real quick intro to myself and to the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. I'm going to describe the Alabama legislative process to you and also tell you what happened last year and how that process went last year and how we were involved in that process. Also what to expect this legislative session, which is coming up in just a few short weeks, how you can get involved, and then we're going to do a little sneak peek of our 2025 policy priorities. I don't want to overhype it or anything, but our youth were involved in writing our policy priorities. They actually helped us write them last year, but we couldn't quite get it all together with this sort of the legislative hubbub that was happening. So we're really excited to announce them before the legislative session this year. So a little bit about me. My name is Christina Clark-O'Karmas. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director at the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health, where I've been the ED for almost 6 years now. I've worked in sexual and reproductive health for the last 13 years, pretty much my whole career. I have an undergraduate in political science and a master's in public policy. So it makes sense in a way that I work with the legislative body. However, that is not like the majority of the work that I do. It's just like I get a little spice, a little sprinkling of it every year during the legislative session, and some years more than others. I'm also the mother to a preschooler. She is 4. She is wonderful and also precocious and has so much energy. It's unbelievable. And I love books and I love houseplants, and that's just a little bit about me. I like to share that because I think it's important, especially in politics, that we see people as full human beings. I recently had a really good conversation with someone who we would consider on the opposing side, but was a lovely human being and is a whole person that has a whole life. And I think it's important for us to remember those things about one another when politics can get kind of heated. So a little bit about our organization. We are the Alabama Campaign for Adolescent Sexual Health. We envision access to comprehensive sexual health for adolescents throughout Alabama, and we advance our mission to champion healthy adolescent development through medically accurate and equitable sexual health education and services. And the ways that we do that, well, one way, the first way is we provide inclusive and community-based sex education to adolescents ages 14 to 24. We also provide education and resources to the parents of those young people. We facilitate usually multiple, right now just one, but usually multiple youth advisory councils. And those give young people a space to learn about the issues that affect their lives and how they can advocate for themselves and their peers. That is an area of our work where we're growing, and it's really exciting to see all the young people that are involved and how eager they are to have those spaces that are for them, and where adults are helping walk them through tough topics and tough situations, but where they can be safe and be themselves as well. We also provide training and professional development to adults who work with youth. So that is most of all of you. And so thank you for being here today. This is our main offering that we do sort of under this training and professional development umbrella at this point. So you can find us here every second Tuesday at noon Central Time, providing some kind of webinar. It's usually not us speaking, it's usually a guest speaker, except for every once in a while when pop in here. And then we also advocate for sex ed via our youth advisory councils and other advocacy networks. And so that's the main piece we're going to be talking about today. Okay, so since we're going to be talking about the legislative process and sort of politics, I just want to say on the top that ACASH is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So that means that our political activism is nonpartisan. We don't take a side based on like party lines, Democrats, Republicans. We work with the folks that want to work with us, and sometimes it's folks that we don't expect, and sometimes the folks that we expect will work with us don't. And so it's just kind of a mishmash, but we are totally nonpartisan. We don't endorse any party or candidate. And we cannot and do not spend a significant amount of our time on lobbying. And just as another like kind of nerdy aside, lobbying is different from advocacy and education, where we do spend a lot of our time. Lobbying is directly trying to influence a particular piece of legislation. So for instance, last year it was HB 195. This year it will be whatever House bill number. And we don't spend a lot of time on the lobbying piece where we are directly influencing policy, but we do spend a lot of time on the advocacy and education side, where we're talking with legislators, educating them about sex ed, of course, educating our communities, and that's all under the umbrella of advocacy and education. So here's a few, I just wanted to include a few photos of us doing lobby and advocacy work. I am fortunate enough to typically travel to Washington, D.C. about once a year. You can see photos of me and my colleagues here and here. And we have the opportunity to talk with our senators and representatives about this issue. And then, of course, at the Alabama State House, where we do our advocacy day and have done for the last few years with some partners. So the Alabama legislative process, in my opinion, closely mirrors the federal legislative process, but not everyone might know what that process is. And so it really depends probably on how engrossed in politics you are. Probably for worse, I am more engrossed than most. And I don't know if anybody remembers the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill jingle, but should have taught all of us when we were younger about how a bill becomes a law. But so I'm going to cover that process and how it works in Alabama. So in Alabama, we have two legislative branches. We have a House and a Senate, just like the federal Congress does. And bills can be generated in the House or the Senate in Alabama. They don't have to be generated in one or the other. Bills can be written by legislators or by special interest groups. Sometimes, a combination of both, but that's how bills are written. And then, so once a bill is submitted and is, placed as a bill to be considered, it is read for the first time and it's assigned to a committee. And the committee, whether it's in the House or the Senate, depends on where it originates. So if it's a bill that originated on the House side, it will go to a House committee. If it originates on the Senate side, then it would go to a Senate committee. So I just said that, but for example, if it's something that has education within the content, it would go to the Education Committee within the House or the Senate. And I'll give a more concrete example when we talk about the 2024 session. Once a bill is assigned to a committee, the committee chair then decides when and if the bill will be placed on the committee calendar. And so that person who is the committee chair has a lot of power. And those are considered to be very valuable appointments, especially depending on the committee, because they can kind of determine what bills go and what bills just die in committee. And so, So individuals or groups can request a public hearing once a bill is assigned to a committee, and the bill is read for the second time in the committee, and that committee decides whether to recommend the bill to move to the floor, or if they're not going to recommend that, then the bill will die in the committee. Continuing on, if the bill passes through the committee, then it goes to be placed on the calendar in the Chamber of Origin. So for instance, if it passes the House Education Committee, then it would move to the House floor for a vote. And this is another place where the bill might die and where leadership within the House or the Senate has a lot of power because they can decide when and if that third reading of the bill ever happens. And they can determine whether there's going to be debate and if there's going to be a call for a vote. So there's a lot of power there. And you kind of have to have all your advocates and ducks in a row to, if you are trying to maybe hold off on a vote. And again, I'll tell how that played out in 2024. And then on the Senate side, you can also filibuster a bill. So you may have heard that word kind of out in the popular dialogue right now, but filibustering is essentially running down the clock to give advocates maybe more time for amendments to be made or for arguments to be made. And maybe they run down the clock and the bill never comes up for a vote. So that is one tactic that can be used. So if the bill passes in one chamber, so let's say it passes in the House, then it has to go through the same process, committee, public hearings, all the things on the other, in the other chamber. So if it passes in the House, it has to go to the Senate and vice versa. If it passes in the Senate, it has to go back to the House. And sometimes a senator and representative or multiple will work together to pass identical bills or nearly identical bills so that they can kind of expedite that process. Once a bill passes both chambers, it goes to the governor's desk to be signed or vetoed. If it's signed, it becomes a law, usually anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 months later. Or if it's vetoed, it will go back down. And at that point, the House and Senate can decide, do they want to do this again? Do they want to try to override the veto? That kind of thing. And so that's the process in a nutshell. So what happened in 2024? Here's some folks that we worked with closely in 2024. These folks are from AIDS Alabama, and Urge Alabama. We spent a lot of time at the State House last year. So what happened in 2024? A bill was introduced by Representative Susan DuBose, which would require all Alabama public schools to teach sexual risk avoidance, or SRA. And sex ed advocates, myself, CCAS, kind of all the big names in sex ed know that sexual risk avoidance is another name for abstinence only until marriage. So we are opposed to sexual risk avoidance. And that is what they were trying to pass as the only acceptable sex ed in Alabama public schools. The SRA bill was referred to the House Education Committee after it was read for the first time because it has to do with education in schools. And ACASH immediately requested a public hearing, which happened for us on March 6th. And we had several advocates on our side. The other side had a lot of advocates as well that were really wanting to pass sexual risk avoidance education. The committee gave the bill a favorable vote on March 20th. So they didn't do it the same day. Sometimes they'll vote on the same day as the public hearing. Sometimes they won't. They didn't in this case. So on March 20th, they gave the bill a favorable vote, and then it moved the bill to the House floor. After that, we did not see the bill on the House floor for a long time. The House leadership did not seem motivated to get it on the calendar. There were a lot of other things happening with budgets and gambling in Alabama last year. So this was just not top of mind. Plus, they had already passed a really bad anti-DEI bill. And so I'm not sure if sort of the hunger, the appetite wasn't really there to also deal with this. So it didn't go on the calendar for a while, but eventually it did. Kind of caught us by surprise. We were thinking we were winding down for the session. I think this was even after our advocacy day, which happened in April, but all of a sudden it was on the calendar and it was read for the third time. And we thought that we had all our ducks in a row and that we had advocates on the floor who were ready to debate and submit amendments. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And we're not sure what the miscommunication was there, but the bill did pass and with very little debate and no amendments submitted. So that was frustrating and disappointing, but we persisted. After the SRA bill passed the House, it had a similar journey in the Senate Education Committee. So there was a public hearing. There was a little bit more debate on the Senate side, and then they did call for a vote the same day because we were getting near the end of the session. So they passed it in the Senate Education Committee, and then it wasn't read on the Senate floor until the final day of session. where sign die was called before it was read for a third time. So sign die is the end of the session, the end of the legislative session for that year. And so fortunately that bill and a few others died on the floor before they were able to be called for a vote. So that was our process in 2024. As I said, it was favorable for us because the bill died. But what we're expecting in 2025 is pretty much the same. We expect that it will be a tough year because of elections this coming year. I'm sorry, in 2026, which is funny because we thought last year was really tough because of the election. But it turns out that maybe we're just going to have a tough time of it all the time. So we expect to see continued attacks on LGBTQ folks, on DEI, libraries and book bans, and sex ed, unfortunately. I've already had some early conversations. We do expect the sexual risk avoidance bill to come back up. I don't know what that's going to look like at this point. As of right now, I haven't seen the bill, a copy of the bill. So it's may be much shorter. It may be longer. It was quite long last year. And sometimes that will keep folks from voting yes on it. So if they submit something shorter, it might be easier to read and therefore get passed quicker. I will say that sort of like on the ground politically, the political climate, I think, is unfortunately very ripe for passing a sexual risk avoidance bill. And our goal is to just keep things as status quo. The current sex ed bill we have is what I would consider to be an abstinence plus law. It's not perfect, it's not great, but it allows us to do the work that we need to do in schools. I'm sorry, I should say we don't do work in schools, but it allows our partners to do the work that they need to do in schools. And it gives young people at least some information that will be helpful to them. Sexual risk avoidance can be quite shaming in their language, and there's a lot of values-based judgments happening in sexual risk avoidance curriculum. Frankly, from the curriculums I've seen, a lot of sexism also happening. So we're hopeful that we can just maintain the status quo and keep pushing good, inclusive sex ed curriculum to schools. But there, I think, is a decent chance that a sexual risk avoidance bill would pass this coming year. But we aren't giving up the fight. As we know, as I hope most of us who are on this call know, sex ed is public health. It deals with public health issues like unplanned pregnancy, STIs, and HIV. And especially for STIs and HIV among young people, that is becoming more and more of a public health crisis, as young people are not being tested and therefore treated for STIs and HIV. And that can lead to long-term consequences. Sex ed is designed to support and not replace parental guidance. So that was one criticism that we received a lot last year, was that we were trying to take the place of parents. There were some folks, I mean, on all sides of the aisle that really felt like sex ed had no place in school at all. And regardless of what kind it was. And so that was an interesting thing, because we know that there's like vast public support for sex ed, even among parents. So to hear our legislators who are like, well, we don't even think this should be taught in schools at all, was just an interesting thing to hear. We do know that sex ed is education and that it does not sexualize youth. There's studies upon studies that show that youth who have access to comprehensive sex ed actually wait longer to have sex than those who receive abstinence-only education. So we are really but that is a narrative that we're going to be fighting against in 2025. It was one we had to fight against in 2024. Unfortunately, opponents of comprehensive sex ed really do believe that it is considered grooming or sexualizing young people to give them medically accurate sexual health information. And so while that's makes me deeply uncomfortable that they believe that, it is a narrative that we have to combat. And I just want to point out that there are currently no comprehensive sex ed programs in Alabama. While we would love to see that happen, we do understand that we have to meet communities where they are. So again, we're not pushing for mandatory sex ed or even comprehensive sex ed. We are simply going to be pushing to maintain the status quo. We don't need a new law. The law was updated in 2022 with bipartisan support. So we're just really trying to hold the line in this next legislative session. And finally, sexual risk avoidance is not medically accurate, and it is designed to motivate through fear and shame rather than facts and personal autonomy. Our proponents of sexual risk avoidance try to say that it's medically accurate and that it does, it gives young people all the information. But from the curriculums I have seen, it does things like refer to condom usage in terms of failure rate instead of success rate. So what that looks like is, instead of saying, if you're going to engage in a sexual behavior, please use a latex condom, it can reduce your risk for STIs and HIV by whatever percent, they say, well, there's no surefire way to protect against STIs and HIV except for abstinence. And even if you use a condom, there's a blank percent, I'm not sure off the top of my head what the percent is, but a blank percent failure rate, right? And so it's a discouraging narrative rather than an encouraging narrative. And it really does lead young people away from using condoms, which we see from the data that young people, even though they're engaging in less sexual behaviors, they're also using barrier methods and contraception less. So that's what we are expecting for 2025. If you are wondering how you can be involved, we have so many ways for you to be involved, and we hope that you will take that step to be an advocate with us. Last year, this is 2 years ago, it was a pretty small group, but last year we had about 40 advocates that were there to talk about sex ed, a lot of adult advocates, some young people, but it was just great to see the support. So ways you can be involved: advocating for sex ed with your friends and family and peers. This might be slightly awkward depending on the kinds of conversations you have with these folks, but public opinion is strongly in favor of sex ed that is medically accurate and gives young people the tools they need to be healthy. So, if there are people in your life that you can be advocating for this with and educating them on this topic, absolutely encourage you to do so. That's kind of a low risk way of getting your feet wet in advocacy and education, is talking to your family and friends. And then the next step would be advocating for sex ed in your community. What does the local school sex ed policy look like? Is there one? Can you attend a school board meeting and ask about this? Is this something that's being thought about in your school board meetings? And how is that being addressed? Is this coming up alongside topics of book bans within the school libraries? Because a lot of books that are banned contain, for instance, LGBTQ characters, information about bodies that they might not get elsewhere. But the important thing, or the great thing about libraries, is that they will also provide references and give medically accurate information where a young person might not be getting that anywhere else, such as on the internet or from friends. So the book bans and sex ed can be tied together in that way. So advocating for sex ed in your community. And then the next step would be to advocate for sex ed with us. We are tentatively planning our advocacy day for April 8th. That kind of depends on when our legislators will take spring break. Last year, they took 2 spring breaks. And so there's that. And then there's the Easter holiday and the Passover holiday that we have to contend with as well. So we are looking at April 8th, thinking that's going to be the date, but we will send out more information. And we would love to have you there. I think April 8th is a Tuesday, so we typically do it on a Tuesday or Thursday because those are days that the legislators are either on the floor or they're in the building, they're around. We can, catch them in the hallway or in their office and have a conversation with them. So that's the plan as of right now. Another way that you can be involved with us is just by being on our legislative update email list. So I send out typically once a week. At the end of the week, we'll send out a legislative update email that tells you all the bills we're watching and kind of what we're paying attention to at the State House. Sometimes we'll say we're supporting a bill or we're not. It really just depends on how deep we are in with our partner advocates. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our policy priorities in a minute, just a little sneak peek, like I said. But that's another way you can be involved, just so you know what's going on at the State House, even if you're not able to come to Advocacy Day. So our 2025 policy priorities, again, this is a sneak peek. We have not released this yet to the public, but this is being recorded, so I will be doing that in short order. Our first one is just to defend the current sex ed law in Alabama. As I said, it's not a great law. It's a law that says that if you teach sex ed, then you have to promote abstinence first. And then after that, you have to talk about medically accurate forms of contraception and ways to prevent STIs and HIV. So it's a very permissible law, however, and so it allows us to do what we need to do the work that we need to do without too many barriers. And the intention of a sexual risk avoidance law would be to put those barriers in place so that only abstinence only until marriage could be taught. And you know, kind of regardless of what your feelings are about young people engaging in sexual activity, we believe at the Alabama campaign that all young people need all the tools in their tool belt to make the decisions that are right for them. And if they are going to engage in a sexual activity, we want them to have all those tools that they might need to protect themselves. And no two young people are alike. And you know, with the data that we have, we know that a lot of young people still are engaging in sexual activities, so we want them to be prepared. We are also working with advocates to advance a tax exemptions bill that would provide tax exemptions for period products, maternity clothing and wear, diapers, formula. There's a lot of things on the list, but this is really a bill. It's a proactive bill that levels the playing field a bit for those of us who carry the burden of childbearing, of having menstrual cycles, and then of course it's a great pro-family, I would even go so far as to say pro-life bill, in that it is also providing this tax exemptions for diapers and formula and other things that babies need. So I think it's a really positive direction, and so Urge Alabama and some other organizations will be taking the lead on that, but we will be helping them talk about that at our Advocacy Day. Alongside these two, so these two are like actually going to be lobbying for or against. These other, I think it's another 3 or 4 that I'm going to talk about, are not things that we're actively pursuing policy around, but they are things that we're going to be paying attention to when it comes to the kind of bills that are going to come up in 2025. So one of our policy priorities is to address racial health disparities in sexual and reproductive health. There's lots of practical ways this can be done. Opening more clinics. As we know, Alabama is having a lot of issues, especially in rural healthcare, with closing clinics and hospitals. We're saying that that does not address some of the health disparities that we see along racial lines. And so we need to make sure clinics are open and they're accessible to folks within communities. And so anything having to do with things that will impact racial minorities and their sexual and reproductive health, we're going to be paying attention to. We're also going to be paying attention to any legislation that impacts or would impact LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ people in Alabama. Unfortunately, I do think we're going to see a lot of this coming up in the 2025 session. Last year, there was an attempt to expand the Don't Say Gay bill. So for those who don't know, Alabama has a bill that is essentially a bill so that you can't talk about any sexual orientation in grades K through 5. And that may or may not be an issue, but if there are people that are inventors or folks that we want to uplift and they happen to be LGBTQ, we can't mention that. And so young people don't see themselves represented, and and it's just an overall problem, representation issue, and an erasure issue. So that's in K through 5 currently. They're trying, last year they attempted to expand it to K through 12. Advocates did a really good job of talking them down to K through 8. But unfortunately, just because we talk them down doesn't mean we support it. And so we want to make sure that bills like that are not passed. We already have a ton of trans rights that have been rolled back in Alabama, including gender affirming healthcare in Alabama. And so we just want to make sure that we can do everything we can to protect LGBTQ youth. And then expanding Medicaid. This is a really simple in quotations. We're one of only, I think, 10 or 11 states who have an expanded Medicaid, and it's leaving thousands of people in the coverage gap. And so those people do not have access to the same preventative health care around sexual and reproductive health that those of us who have insurance have, or who have Medicaid have. And so we continue to urge our legislature and governor to expand Medicaid, and we'll continue to beat that drum in the 2025 session. So that is all I have for you all today. This is my contact information, but I would love to open the floor for any questions or comments at this time. I know we're still, I think, yeah, we have not used up all of our time. So I'm happy to give you time back, but also happy to hear any questions or comments. You can also utilize the chat if you're not comfortable coming off mic.
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay. My name's Todd Clark. I live in Enterprise, Alabama. And my first question is about your advocacy day. What exactly, if I were to take a day off work and come to this event, what exactly would I be doing?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I'm trying to back up here. So when we go to Advocacy Day, we tend to start the day maybe around 8 or 9 in the morning. We have breakfast, and then we do a little bit of orientation and advocacy training for folks. So we'll talk them through the bills that we're asking them to advocate for or against, and we'll give them the talking points that they need. And then they get in small groups with other people from their district. So if you're from Enterprise, then you might get in a small group with other people from Coffee County, or other people from the Wiregrass. We might stick you in with a different group, but you would meet with a group, or you would be with a group, and you guys would spend some time practicing how to talk to your legislature, because that can be, especially for young people, can be a little bit intimidating. And so that we spend a little bit of time practicing, and after we practice, we go to the state house, or if we're already at the state house, we go to the legislature's offices, and sometimes we have a meeting, and we sit down and we talk to them about the issues that we're concerned about. Sometimes we don't have a meeting, and we just kind of have to wait around the office and see when the legislator might be back, especially if it's a day where they're on the House or the Senate floor. But you spend that time talking to your legislators or their staff, and then you kind of go back with your group and you debrief, and you fill out an evaluation form talking about the experience. And that way our team knows who to follow up with, and make sure if they have questions, they can be answered. But that tends to take up the whole day. We have lunch in there, but that it's usually like 8 to 3, and that's what the day kind of looks like.
Okay, thank you. My second question had to deal with contacting representatives. Um, if we have never contacted our representative, do you have templates or samples of what a letter to a representative might look like? And maybe some of the language that you would prefer to have in those letters that we could kind of tailor to our specific to the specific person that we're writing to?
That's a good question too. Yes, we do have some of that stuff on our website. But I will also, when Taryn follows up with the recording, I'll have Taryn include some of those links in there as well. So you can see some of the talking points that we used last year. And then we do have kind of a script for what a legislative visit or letter could look like. And so you can, tweak it to fit your needs. And either send a letter, or if you're having a in-person conversation, you can use that as a template for that sit down conversation as well.
Okay, super. That would help out very much. I've got to drop off here, but I just want to tell you this was a great briefing. It was very informative, and it's got me thinking about some other questions that I can write to you about.
Awesome, thanks. Any other questions or comments? We do want to ask you, Taryn has already dropped this in the chat. Thank you, Taryn. But we do want to ask you before you leave us for the day to go to the chat and click on the evaluation form there. It'll take you to a Google form and just maybe 5 minutes tops to fill out what this experience was like for you today and what you'd like to see moving forward. And if there's any resources that you need, you can drop them all there. That helps us, get better and find speakers that you guys are interested in. So please take a minute to fill out that Google form, which is again in the chat. And with that, I'm going to give you guys your time back. I appreciate you all being here. I hope this was helpful, and we hope to see you on Advocacy Day, but certainly sometime within the session, and keep in touch with us as we move in the session this year. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Lauren.